They found him at dawn inside his tent, frozen stiff, as if carved from ice, eyes wide open, mouth parted mid-breath. His name was Private Richardson, 19 years old. By the time the others realized he wasn't moving, he'd been dead for hours. But the air wasn't cold. The night had been mild, a steady 63 degrees Fahrenheit. No frost, no wind. His body should have been warm, but his skin felt like stone, his lips blue, his hands curled inward like they'd clutched something that wasn't there. The medic who examined him shook his head and whispered to no one in particular, "This ain't nature." The real terror came when they undressed the body. Large blackened handprints seared into his chest and arms, like something had reached through the canvas walls and squeezed the life from him without leaving a single bruise. His tentmates swore they saw him speaking to someone in the dark that night, not whispering to himself, speaking, conversing, nodding, pausing like he was listening. And when asked who it was, they answered in shaky voices, "A man we saw burn alive in the tree line 3 nights ago." This wasn't the first, and it wouldn't be the last. Across America's blood-soaked Civil War camps, stories like this would multiply, whispered by candlelight, shared over cold rations, scribbled hastily in journals never sent home. They weren't just ghost stories, they were symptoms. What happens when 600,000 souls die before they're ready? When death comes faster than faith can prepare for? When men are asked to sleep among the dead? This was the beginning of something darker. And Private Richardson. He didn't just die in his sleep. He was claimed. October 1863. 3 months after Gettysburg fell silent. The smoke had cleared, the dead had been buried, and the field reports filed away. But for one Union patrol sent to scout Devil's Den, the war wasn't over. Not even close. They were ordered to cross the boulder-strewn hills just past midnight, a routine patrol across haunted ground. But what they saw shattered every rule of reality they thought they understood. Under a low-hanging moon, they spotted a full company of Confederate infantry standing at attention uniforms, tattered rifles, shouldered faces turned toward the Union line. Only, their eyes were empty. Hollow sockets stared through the night like burned-out lanterns. Their faces hung in tatters. Some had no jaws, others had chunks of skull exposed. But their bodies, their posture remained perfectly still, not trembling, not shifting. And then they moved. In unison, the dead began to march. Boots striking stone, gear rattling, whispered orders passing through the air like fog. They marched past the living patrol, brushing within feet. The smell was unbearable: gunpowder, rotting meat, and something else. Something older. They moved with military precision toward the Union line, the same path they'd taken the day they died. None of the Union soldiers fired. None spoke. They simply watched, paralyzed, as a ghost army reenacted its final mission. Later, their report would be dismissed. War nerves, the officer said. Fatigue. But those men were never the same. Some deserted. One took his own life weeks later. And the site. It became a place no one wanted to speak of again. But the sightings didn't stop. Local residents reported footsteps outside their windows at night. Officers posted guards who fled their posts by morning. Camp dogs refused to go near the boulders. They said Devil's Den lived up to its name, not because of who died there, but because of who stayed. In time, the area was declared off limits. One officer summed it up best. Some places on this earth are no longer meant for the living. September 17th, 1862, Antietam Creek, Maryland. The single bloodiest day in American history. In just 12 hours, over 23,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing. The soil drank so much blood that it turned the stream into a crimson mirror. And for weeks after, nothing in that valley behaved as it should. Local farmers wrote of cattle refusing to drink from the creek. The water ran red, not metaphorically, but visibly. One farmer said the fish floated belly up in thick currents that smelled like iron and sun-rotted flesh. His quote survives in a faded letter: "The creek moans at night." It sounds like men whispering through their teeth. Then came the mill workers. For decades, their water wheels had spun without incident. But after the battle, something changed. The wheels would groan to life on their own in the dead of night, grinding nothing. And sometimes, people heard something inside the machinery. Cries. Faint, wet, desperate. "Help me. It's in my lungs. Mama." One described seeing a face in the spinning gears. Another saw fingers reach through the slats before vanishing into mist. Union soldiers camped near the infamous cornfield, a place where volleys of gunfire had dropped entire regiments, reported, hearing musket fire, screaming, shouted orders. Every single night. But each morning, the corn stood undisturbed. Not a single bullet hole, not a single drop of blood. It was like the battlefield refused to forget. Some believed they were caught in a loop, that the spirits were reliving the fight endlessly. Others said something darker was trapped there, something that fed on the energy of the dying. Military chaplains reported a growing fear among men stationed at Antietam. Many refused to sleep near the water. Some tore pages from their Bibles and pinned them inside their coats. But the most chilling account came from a Union burial detail. One soldier wrote in his journal, "We hear the dead calling to us from beneath the corpses. They ask for water. They ask for their mothers. The doctors say it's just gas escaping the bodies, but gas doesn't call you by name." At the center of the Antietam battlefield stood a simple white structure, Dunker Church. Before the war, it had been a sanctuary, a place of peace, prayer, and silence. But during the battle, it became something else entirely, a charnel house, a place where surgeons sawed through limbs faster than they could count, where blood ran so thick it turned the floors to sludge. Official medical reports from the time describe bodies laid side by side with no room between them, arms and legs tossed into corners like split firewood. The altar, once draped in white linen, became an operating table. The cloth stained so deeply the blood never washed out. When the battle ended, the pastor returned to his church. But what he found wasn't a holy place, it was a mass grave sealed by a roof. He tried to restore it, to reclaim it for God, but each night brought new horrors. He began hearing moaning from the pews, weeping in the rafters, whispers from the pulpit. One night he found the phrase, "Tell my mother I tried to be brave," written in blood across the floorboards. He scrubbed it away. The next night it returned, written again in a trembling hand. Others who passed by after dark saw figures moving behind the windows, even though the building was empty. They reported flickers of lamplight inside, the sound of bone saws slicing, doctors shouting for assistance, men praying between screams. Every night the surgery continued. The congregation abandoned the building within weeks. They said the place no longer belonged to the living. Locals began calling it the Chapel of Echoes. Some said it had become a trap for pain, a place where death refused to leave. Years later, one Union veteran returned to the site and described the feeling as standing inside a wound that never closed. He left after 5 minutes and never returned. And if you visit the area today, some claim you can still hear them, the doctors, the dying, the prayers. Not echoes of the past, but rituals still in progress. Because some buildings aren't haunted, they're possessed. April 1862, Shiloh, Tennessee. A place whose name means peace. But what unfolded there was anything but. It began in a blooming peach orchard, trees, heavy with pink blossoms, the scent of spring thick in the air. And then the cannon fire started. In 2 days, over 23,000 soldiers fell, their bodies collapsing among the flowers. Veterans of the battle wrote that it felt like killing each other in the Garden of Eden. Petals fell like snow, mixing with blood and gunpowder. Men died with blossoms stuck to their cheeks, as if nature was trying to offer comfort in their final moments. One Union soldier wrote in his journal, "I fired into a line of gray coats, and when they dropped, the peach trees behind them were torn apart. But the flowers kept falling gentle, like nothing had happened." That contrast broke something in men's minds. Several were documented laughing uncontrollably as they reloaded, their faces streaked with tears. Others collapsed and refused to rise even when ordered. Medical personnel described bizarre phenomena in the days that followed. The peach trees bloomed again, but not in pink, in white. Blossoms, ghost pale, blooming on branches shattered by gunfire. Some believed it was nature trying to cleanse the horror. Others thought it was something else, a signal perhaps. Local resident Martha Shiloh later wrote, At dawn, when the mist rises from the river, I still see them. Union, Confederate. They stand among the trees like statues, wounded men, carrying the dead, some kneeling in prayer. And when the sun rises, they vanish. Animals avoided the orchard. Children cried if brought near. And some locals claimed to hear a soft rain of petals falling even on clear days. They said the ground had absorbed too much grief, that the beauty of the orchard had become a mask, a disguise for something darker, deeper, and unwilling to leave. Because sometimes war doesn't scar the earth. It rewrites it. May 1864, the wilderness of Virginia, a dense, tangled forest that swallowed light and sound. Even before the war, locals whispered of strange happenings in those woods, hunters who vanished, trees that bled sap the color of rust, voices in the brush. But when the Union and Confederate armies clashed there, those legends turned into something far worse. The battle set the forest ablaze. Gunfire ignited the dry underbrush, and within minutes the woods were an inferno. Men burned alive where they stood. Their screams mingled with the roar of fire until they were indistinguishable, not voices, but wails of something ancient and inhuman. Veterans wrote that the sound haunted them more than the gunshots. One officer described it as hearing the forest scream back. And then the sightings began. Figures wrapped in flames were seen walking between tents in the days after the battle. They didn't burn. They didn't leave tracks. But when they passed, campfires' dimmed flames turned blue and animals bolted. Soldiers claimed to see eyes glowing from the tree line, not animal, not human, watching with a hunger that made men sweat in the cold. Medical personnel documented a phenomenon they called flame hysteria. Soldiers claimed they were being touched by fire yet bore no burns. They screamed of being consumed, begged for water, clawed at their skin, and yet their bodies were unmarked. The most terrifying deaths were those no one could explain. Soldiers found frozen solid in warm weather, their bodies locked in rigor, faces twisted in fear, and always marked with blackened handprints. A Union surgeon wrote in a confidential report, "Whatever touched them, it didn't burn. It took the heat away. Morale collapsed. Men refused to sleep. Whole regiments rotated through prayer circles, cleansing rituals, clutching tokens from home like talismans." One general wrote, "We fear our own dead more than the enemy. At least the enemy bleeds when you shoot them." The wilderness became a place of whispers, not about tactics, but curses. Not of honor, but hunger. Because whatever ignited in those woods, it never went out. And it still wants more. The Civil War ended in 1865. The guns went silent. The treaties were signed. The flags were folded. But for many who fought, the war never truly ended. Across the country, veterans returned to fields they once bled in: Gettysburg, Antietam, Shiloh, only to report unexplained sounds, fleeting shadows, and the overwhelming sensation of being watched. Some said the air shimmered near old battlefield graves. Others swore they heard voices calling from beneath the soil. Doctors of the era began documenting what they called melancholy of the soldier. Today we call it something else, post-traumatic stress disorder, but back then it had no name, no treatment, no explanation, only silence and stories. Military records tell of orderlies refusing to work night shifts in field morgues. Corpses reportedly shifted positions. Some were found sitting upright. Some appeared to have reached for something or someone in their final moment. Early photographers documented ghostly blurs in their plates, figures that weren't present during exposure, standing behind the wounded like sentinels. Was it trauma or something deeper? Generals tried to stop the spread of ghost stories, but that only drove them underground, passed in code shared in whispers, etched into the backs of Bibles. Superstition became survival. Men carried locks of hair, bits of bone, pocket watches engraved with their child's name, not to ward off bullets, but to remind the dead that they were still among the living. And maybe that's what all these stories were about, a desperate attempt to make sense of the senseless, to keep the fallen close, to ensure the war didn't steal everything. Because behind every number on a casualty report was a name, a voice, a face that still walks with us.